My name is Clara Whitfield, and I am 62 years old. Some truths don't arrive like thunder. They arrive like footsteps you don't remember inviting inside. The morning of my husband's funeral felt unfinished. Not wrong, exactly, just incomplete, like a sentence that stops halfway through. The sky stayed pale and still, as if it didn't want to commit to rain or sunlight. I remember noticing that detail because my mind needed something small to hold on to. I stood a few steps away from the grave, not right at the edge. I didn't trust my knees that day. My hands were clasped in front of me, fingers pressing into one another, nails biting skin. It was the only thing keeping me anchored. At my age, you learn how to hide tremors, how to breathe shallow so no one notices you're coming apart. The ground had been freshly opened. The smell of damp earth rose quietly, heavy and metallic. Not dark, not light, just final. The casket rested beside the opening, not above it yet. Closed, still. Someone had wiped it clean so thoroughly that it almost reflected the sky. That bothered me more than it should have. My husband had never liked things too polished. Behind me, people murmured in low voices. A cough, a sniff, fabric brushing against fabric. I didn't turn around. Grief had already taken enough from me. I wasn't giving it my face, too. When the men stepped forward to move the casket, the metal handles clicked softly. That sound cut deeper than the prayers. They lifted, paused, then slowly guided it over the open ground. The straps tightened with a faint groan, not loud, not dramatic, just tired. I watched the casket move inch by inch, my eyes refusing to leave it. Not because I was strong, but because if I looked away, I was afraid something irreversible would happen. That's when my phone buzzed. Once. Short. Sharp. I froze. Funerals are not places where phones belong. They are meant to be silent, sealed off from the living world. For a moment, I convinced myself it was nothing. A muscle twitch, a phantom vibration. But my body didn't believe that lie. Slowly, carefully, I reached into my handbag. Every movement felt louder than it should have. One message, from a number I had memorized for decades. I am still alive. Trust no one. My vision narrowed. The sounds around me faded as if someone had lowered the volume on the world. I didn't cry out. I didn't gasp. I simply stopped breathing for a moment, long enough to feel my heart slam into my ribs. The words didn't flicker. They didn't feel rushed. They sat there, calmly, like they had all the time in the world. Nothing around me reacted. No one screamed. No one dropped anything. The casket continued its slow descent. That terrified me more than the message itself. Because if something this impossible could happen without disturbing the world, what else had already been disturbed without my noticing? I slipped the phone back into my bag and lifted my head again. That's when I saw my children, standing side by side, watching. Their faces were composed, careful, not shattered, not lost, prepared. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not panic, not denial. Awareness. If this message was real, then someone had lied, deliberately, and I was standing in the center of it. And if it wasn't real, then someone knew my life well enough to choose the cruelest possible moment to reach into it. Either way, the funeral wasn't closing a chapter. It was opening one. Because whatever was being lowered into that ground was not finished with me. The cemetery emptied faster than I expected. One moment there were voices, soft footsteps, the careful choreography of sympathy, And next, only the sound of gravel under tires as cars pulled away, one by one. No one lingered. People rarely do once the earth has been closed. I remained standing long after the last prayer ended, my eyes fixed on the mound of soil now pressed smooth, decorated with flowers that already looked out of place. Too alive, too colorful. Death has a way of making everything else look inappropriate. "Mom?" My daughter's voice came from behind me, careful, measured, the same voice she used when she didn't want to upset me, or when she didn't want to say too much. "I'll meet you at home," I said without turning. There was a pause, a breath taken but not released. "We can ride together," she offered. "You shouldn't be alone right now." I finally turned. She stood beside her brother, both of them dressed perfectly for morning. Black coats, neutral expressions, eyes dry. Too dry. "I need some air," I said. "I'll drive myself." Neither of them argued. That should have comforted me. Instead, it unsettled something deep in my chest. On the drive home, the message burned in my handbag like a secret that refused to stay buried. I didn't look at it again. Not yet. I needed to feel the house first, to remind myself what real grief felt like before letting doubt contaminate it. The house greeted me the way it always had, quietly. The ticking clock in the hallway, the faint smell of old wood and lemon cleaner, the absence that now filled every room. I set my bag down and leaned against the door longer than necessary, pressing my forehead into the cool surface. This was the first time I had come home without him. My husband had been many things: patient, stubborn, quietly observant, but above all, he had been predictable in the best way. Every evening, his shoes by the door, his mug in the sink, his voice somewhere in the house. Now the silence felt staged, artificial. I moved through the rooms slowly, touching nothing, letting my fingers skim water the way you might skim water, afraid of how deep it goes. In the study, his chair remained pushed back slightly, exactly as he'd left the last morning. The newspaper lay folded on the desk. I didn't sit. Instead, I opened my bag and took out my phone. The message was still there. "I am still alive. Trust no one." No timestamp anomaly, no strange symbols, no obvious sign of a scam. I typed with hands steadier than I expected. "Who is this?" The reply didn't come immediately. That bothered me more than if it had. Minutes passed. 5, 10. I placed the phone face down and paced the room, trying to anchor myself in logic. Grief does strange things. Shock fractures perception. Brains look for patterns where none exist. And yet, my husband had never liked being buried quickly. He had said it more than once, usually half joking. "Give it a day or two, let the dust settle." The funeral had been arranged with remarkable speed. I picked the phone up again. A new message appeared. Someone who owes him the truth. My breath caught. I sat. Slowly. "If this is a joke," I typed, "it's cruel." The dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. He knew something was coming, he didn't know when. I stared at the screen until my eyes began to ache. My husband had been cautious, yes, thoughtful, yes, but afraid? I typed one word. "What?" The response came almost immediately this time. "Your children are not who you think they are." The room seemed to tilt. I laughed, once, sharp and involuntary. That was absurd, cruel, predictable. Grief stories always turned family into villains. It was the easiest narrative. I set the phone down. "No," I said aloud to the empty room. "That's not possible." But my voice sounded unsure. Over the next few days, grief gave me a strange kind of invisibility. People didn't expect much from me, didn't ask too many questions. They let me drift. And that's when I began to notice things. My children called more than they had ever before, not to talk, not to reminisce, to check. Are you home? Did anyone come by? Have you gone through Dad's papers yet? Each question wrapped in concern, each voice softened carefully. At 62, you learn the difference between care and control. One afternoon, my son stopped by unannounced. He brought groceries, things that spoiled quickly: milk, fresh bread, prepared meals. "I thought you might forget to eat," he said with a smile. I watched his hands as he placed the bags on the counter. They didn't tremble. They didn't hesitate. Too confident. We sat at the table where my husband and I had eaten for decades. "I can help manage things for a while," he said lightly. "Accounts, bills, all that paperwork." "I'm capable," I replied. He smiled again. "Of course, but you don't have to be strong right now." Strong. That word again. That night, the phone vibrated in my pocket. "They're moving faster than planned." My stomach tightened. "Planned for what?" I typed. The response came slower this time. Control. I slept poorly. Dreams bled into waking thoughts, my husband's voice just out of reach, doors closing, papers sliding across tables I couldn't see. The next morning, I went to the bank, not because I suspected theft, because instinct had begun to whisper louder than grief. The teller recognized me immediately. She had known us for years. Her sympathy was sincere. When she pulled up the account history, her expression changed just slightly. "There have been some withdrawals recently," she said gently. "How recent?" She turned the screen toward me. "Dates, amounts, large enough to notice, small enough to hide." "I didn't authorize these," I said. She hesitated. "Your husband came in with your son," she explained. "He said he was tired and needed help." Tired. My husband had been careful to the point of obsession. I left without saying much. Outside, the sunlight felt aggressive, like it was trying to convince me everything was normal. That evening, both children arrived together. That never happened by accident. They spoke about options, about simplifying, about what's best moving forward. The words sounded kind. The intention did not. "There are places," she said carefully, "communities, where you wouldn't be alone." Communities. As if the house I'd lived in for 35 years was suddenly unsuitable. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't check it. I already knew. That night, headlights swept across the front wall, paused, then moved on. The next morning, the message waited. They believe time is on their side. I sat at the kitchen table and typed the question I had been avoiding. "Who are you?" The reply took longer than any before. "Someone your husband trusted when he stopped trusting the people closest to him." I closed my eyes. Something inside me settled. Not peace. Resolve. I went back into the study and opened drawers I had never touched before, moved books, lifted folders. I didn't find answers yet, but I found direction. And for the first time since the funeral, I understood something clearly. Whatever my children believed they were planning, they had underestimated one thing. I had lived 62 years, loved deeply, lost painfully, and I was no longer willing to be led quietly anywhere. Grief changes shape after the funeral. In the beginning, it is loud, sharp, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. But after the flowers wilt and the calls slow down, it becomes something else, quieter, heavier, more observant. In the days that followed, I stopped crying in public, not because the pain had faded, but because I needed my eyes clear. The messages continued, but not often. Whoever was on the other side understood something important. Too much communication creates patterns. Patterns can be traced. Instead, the silence between messages carried as much meaning as the words themselves. I spent most mornings alone at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug that went cold before I remembered to drink from it. My husband's chair remained empty across from me. I didn't move it. People assume widows want to erase reminders. The truth is, we cling to them, not out of weakness, but as proof that what we lost was real. One afternoon, my daughter called. Her tone was lighter than usual. Too light. "Mum," she said, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we went through Dad's things together." Together. I knew what that meant. "I'm not ready," I replied. There was a pause, just long enough to be noticeable. "You don't have to do it alone," she said carefully. "We can help." Help. Another word that had begun to feel dangerous. "I'll tell you when I'm ready," I said. Her sigh was quiet, but not entirely hidden. "Okay," she said. "Just don't wait too long." After we hung up, I stared at the wall for a long time. Waiting too long had never been my problem. That evening, the message arrived. "They're preparing documents." I didn't ask how the sender knew. By now, I had accepted something instinctively. Whoever this was had access I did not. "What kind of documents?" I typed. The response came after several minutes. Authority, decision-making, contingencies. Contingencies. The word echoed unpleasantly. The next morning, I made an appointment with our family lawyer. I didn't call ahead to tell my children. I didn't mention it afterward. The office smelled faintly of paper and old carpet, the kind of place where life-changing decisions were made quietly, behind closed doors. The lawyer had known my husband well. They had played golf together once a month for years. "I'm sorry for your loss, Clara," he said sincerely. "Thank you," I replied. "I need to ask you something." I watched his face carefully as I spoke. "Have there been any recent changes to my husband's documents? Power of attorney, trusts, anything like that?" He frowned slightly. "Not that I'm aware of," he said. "Why do you ask?" I chose my words with precision. "I've been told there may have been discussions." He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Your husband was very clear. Everything remained unchanged." Relief and fear arrived together. If nothing had been altered legally, then my children were trying something else. That afternoon, I returned home to find someone had been inside. Nothing was missing, nothing was disturbed, and yet the air felt touched. Drawers not quite aligned, papers shifted just enough to be noticed. Someone had been looking carefully. That night, the message came again. "They're checking what you know." My fingers hovered over the screen. How do I stop them? The reply came slower than usual. "You don't, not yet. You observe." Observe. It felt passive, but observation, I was beginning to understand, was power. Over the next week, my children's visits became more frequent. Never together now, always separately. Divide and soften. My son spoke gently, asking if I was sleeping well, if I'd been eating, if I felt confused at times. My daughter brought pamphlets, resources, she called them. "Just information," she said, placing them neatly on the table. Senior living, assisted care, medical evaluations. I didn't throw them away. I stacked them carefully and left them visible. Let them believe I was considering. Let them relax. At 62, you learn patience not as waiting, but as preparation. One evening, as I was washing dishes, my phone buzzed. "They've scheduled an evaluation." I froze. With whom? The answer came immediately. "A doctor who has never met you." I dried my hands slowly. This was escalation. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. Minutes later, the doorbell rang. My son stood on the porch, papers in hand. "We just want to make sure you're okay," he said softly, "after everything you've been through." I studied his face. The boy I had once bandaged scraped knees for was still there, buried under something colder. "I'm fine," I said. He smiled, but his eyes tightened. "This is just a formality," he said. "The doctor will come by tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" I repeated. "Yes," he said. "It'll be quick." I nodded. "I'll think about it." His relief was immediate. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I went into the study and pulled every box from the shelves. Receipts, letters, old notebooks. And then I found it. A thin folder tucked behind a row of books my husband hadn't touched in years. Inside were notes, handwritten, precise, dates, names, amounts. And at the back of the folder, a business card. No message, no explanation, just a name. I typed it into my phone. A private investigator. My heart pounded. The message arrived seconds later. "You found it." I sat down slowly. "He knew, didn't he?" I typed. The reply took longer than any before. "He suspected, enough to prepare." The room felt suddenly too small. "Is he really alive?" I asked. The dots appeared, disappeared. Finally, "No." The word hit harder than I expected. I closed my eyes. "Then why tell me that?" The response was immediate. "Because they needed you unstable. I needed you alert." I swallowed. "Who are you?" The answer came at last. "Someone he asked to protect you if he couldn't." Tears finally came. Slow, heavy, unstoppable. Not from loss, from understanding. The next morning, the doctor arrived. I let him in. I answered every question calmly. I remembered dates, names, details. When he left, he shook my hand. "You're grieving," he said gently, "but you are not impaired." That afternoon, my children arrived together. Their smiles were tight. "What did the doctor say?" my daughter asked. "That I'm fine." The silence that followed was loud, too loud. And in that silence, I understood something clearly for the first time. They weren't worried about me. They were afraid, because whatever they had planned had already begun to unravel. And this time, I was ready. Not because I felt brave, but because fear had finally exhausted itself. There's a moment when anxiety stops screaming and starts whispering instructions. That's when you know you've crossed from panic into clarity. The house felt different after that afternoon. Quieter, but not empty. Alert, like it was listening with me. I didn't confront my children. Not yet. People who believe they are in control make mistakes when they feel rushed. I decided to give them space to make theirs. That evening, I cooked for the first time since the funeral. Nothing elaborate. Soup, bread. The simple kind of meal my husband used to praise like it was a feast. I set 2 bowls on the table out of habit, then stopped. I left them there anyway. Grief doesn't need correction, it needs acknowledgement. My phone buzzed, just once. They're regrouping. I nodded to myself, though no one could see it. "Good," I whispered. The next few days unfolded carefully. My children didn't call, didn't visit. Silence, but not peace. It felt strategic. I used the time to read everything my husband had left behind. Not just the notes in the folder, but the margins of books, the backs of envelopes, old calendars where he'd circled dates and written short phrases only I would understand. Ask later, check again, not write. He had always been like that, quietly cautious, never alarmist, always observant. And suddenly I saw the pattern. He hadn't been paranoid, he had been preparing. The investigator's name stayed in my thoughts like an echo. I didn't call, Not yet. Instead, I went to the bank. The woman behind the counter recognized me immediately. Her sympathy was genuine, and that mattered. "I'd like a full account history," I said calmly. "All recent activity." She hesitated just long enough to be telling. "There were some changes," she said. "Authorized?" I asked. "Yes," she replied, "but not by you." The words settled slowly. She turned the screen toward me. Withdrawals, transfers, small enough not to alarm, but consistent. My son's name appeared more than once. "Was my husband present for these?" I asked. She lowered her voice. "He wasn't always," she said. "Your son explained he was assisting." Assisting. Another word that had learned to lie. I thanked her and left without comment. Outside, the sunlight felt harsh, like it didn't belong to me anymore. That night, the message came again. "Now you understand." I typed back with steady hands. "Yes." The dots appeared. Good, because they're moving faster now. The next morning, my daughter arrived unannounced. She brought coffee. I didn't drink it. She talked about memories, about childhood, about how strong I was being. Her kindness felt rehearsed. "Mom," she said gently, "we're worried about you being alone so much." I met her eyes. "I'm not alone," I said. She blinked. "Of course you are," she replied. "Dad—" I didn't say lonely. I said alone. The distinction unsettled her. She shifted in her seat. "There are legal things we need to discuss," she said carefully. "Just planning." Planning. I smiled, small, polite. "Of course," I said, "when the time comes." Her relief was immediate. She left believing she was still ahead. She wasn't. That evening, I finally made the call. The investigator answered on the second ring. He didn't introduce himself. "Clara," he said quietly, "I was wondering when you'd call." I closed my eyes. "So, he trusted you?" I asked. "Yes." "Enough to lie to me?" I asked. There was a pause. "No," he said. "Enough to protect you." We spoke for a long time. He explained what my husband had feared, what he had suspected, not proven. Patterns, behavior, pressure. Nothing solid enough to accuse, but enough to prepare. "Your children underestimated him," he said, "and they're underestimating you." That night I slept, not deeply, but peacefully, because knowledge had replaced confusion. The next move came exactly when he said it would. A letter, official, polite. A recommendation for legal guardianship evaluation. My children's signatures at the bottom. I laughed, a soft, humorless sound. They had chosen escalation, which meant they were desperate. I called the investigator again. "It's time," I said. "Yes," he replied. "It is." We didn't rush. We documented, recorded conversations, saved messages, tracked timelines. Truth doesn't need speed, it needs precision. 2 weeks later, my daughter invited me to dinner. Together. I accepted. The table was set carefully, too carefully. They talked about love, about concern, about family. I listened, and then I spoke. "I've made arrangements," I said calmly. They leaned forward. "I've reviewed the accounts, the documents, the visits." Their faces stilled. "And I've decided," I said softly, "that no one will be making decisions for me." The silence was immediate, sharp. My son's jaw tightened. "You're confused," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm informed." My daughter reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. "I know what you're trying to do," I said gently, "and I know why." The color drained from her face. "You should leave," I added, "before you say something you can't take back." They left without arguing, which told me everything. That night, the message came one last time.
"You won't need me much longer." I typed back, "Thank you." The reply came after a pause. "He'd be proud of you." I stood at the window for a long time after that. The house was quiet, but it wasn't listening anymore. It was resting. And for the first time since the funeral, I understood something deeply and without doubt. Whatever they had planned for me had failed, because grief may slow you down, but truth sharpens you, and I was no longer standing at the edge of anything. I was standing in the middle, fully awake, fully aware, and finally, ready.
The first knock came 3 days later. Not loud, not urgent, just firm enough to remind me that someone believed they still had authority here. I didn't open the door right away. I stood in the hallway, listening to the sound of their breathing through the wood. Impatient, controlled. People who think they're winning always knock like that. When I finally opened the door, my son stood there with a smile already prepared. "Mom," he said gently, "we need to talk." I stepped aside. The house felt smaller with him inside it. Not because of his size, but because of what he carried in with him. Concern, sharpened into something else. He didn't sit where he usually did. He chose the chair closest to the door. A detail most people wouldn't notice, but I did. "You shouldn't be alone so much," he said, glancing around. "You haven't been yourself." "I'm exactly myself," I replied. He laughed softly. "That's what worries us." Us. The word landed like a paper cut. He placed a folder on the table, thick, official. "I don't want this to feel like an attack," he said, "but we're running out of options." I opened the folder slowly. Psychological evaluations, statements, recommendations. None signed by someone who had ever looked me in the eyes. "They're saying I can't manage my affairs," I said calmly. "For now," he corrected, "just until things stabilize." I closed the folder. "I won't sign this." His smile tightened. "You don't have to," he said. "The court can decide." There it was. Not concern, control. I met his gaze. "Do you know what your father used to say about force?" I asked. He frowned. "He said," I continued, "that people only use it when persuasion has failed." Silence stretched. "You're being difficult," he snapped, the softness slipping. "No," I replied. "I'm being accurate." He stood abruptly. "You think you're smarter than us," he said, "but you're alone, Mom." I stood too. "No," I said quietly, "I'm not." Something flickered across his face. Fear, just for a second. That evening, the investigator came by. He didn't park near the house, didn't use the front entrance. Careful men don't announce themselves. We sat at the kitchen table where my children once did homework. "I need to know how far they're willing to go," I said. He didn't hesitate. "They've already crossed lines. The question is whether they'll admit it or double down." The answer came sooner than expected. 2 mornings later, I woke to a voicemail from a doctor I'd never met.
"Mrs. Whitfield," the voice said smoothly, "your children are concerned about your recent behavior." Concern again. That afternoon, a social worker arrived. She was kind. That's what made it dangerous. "I'm here to assess your living situation," she said, notebook ready. I let her look at the clean counters, the organized bills, the calendar marked weeks ahead, at the absence of chaos. "You seem capable," she said slowly. "Yes," I replied, "I am." That night, the investigator played me something I hadn't been ready for, a recording, my daughter's voice. "He won't sign," she said, "so we'll have to push harder." My son responded, impatient. "She's stalling. Dad always said she was stubborn." Dad. The word felt stolen. She won't last, my daughter added. She's tired. The investigator paused the audio. They think exhaustion will do the work for them, he said. I smiled faintly. They don't understand exhaustion, I replied. They confuse it with weakness. The hearing was scheduled quietly. No dramatic summonses, just paperwork. They didn't expect me to show up prepared. I did. With records, with timelines, with statements, with proof of financial interference. When my son took the stand, he spoke carefully about love, about fear for my safety. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I told the truth about money moved without consent, about pressure, about lies dressed as protection. The room shifted, not loudly, but perceptibly. When the investigator testified, the air changed completely. Dates, messages, intent. The judge didn't look at my children when she spoke next. She looked at me. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, you are not incapacitated. My son's breath caught. The petition is denied. That was when the mask finally slipped. In the hallway afterward, my daughter grabbed my arm. You've ruined everything, she hissed. I removed her hand gently. No, I said. I stopped you. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. The final message came that night, not from the investigator, from my husband's old phone. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. I didn't reply. Some conversations don't need answers. I went to bed early. The house was quiet, not watchful, not tense, just quiet, because something had shifted permanently. They no longer had momentum, and I had learned something I would never forget. People who try to erase you always underestimate how long you've been learning to stand your ground. And I had been learning my entire life.
That night, after the hearing, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark living room, the glow from the street lamp outside painting long shadows across the floor. Shadows used to comfort me. They meant Ernest was asleep in the chair, the television murmuring to itself. Now they just meant space. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed. Winning against people who know your routines, your fears, your history, that doesn't bring relief. It brings awareness. They knew where I lived. They knew when I slept. They knew how much strength I had left. And now they knew I wouldn't fold. That makes people dangerous. My phone rang just after midnight. I didn't answer. It rang again, then stopped. A message followed. We tried to help you. You chose this. No signature. Didn't need one. I deleted it. Not out of fear, out of clarity. The investigator had warned me this would happen. When control fails, he said, people rewrite the story. The next morning, my neighbor Doris knocked. She didn't usually knock anymore. She just walked in. But that day, she waited. You okay? She asked softly. I nodded. You sure? She pressed. I met her eyes. They're angry, I said, and they're not done. She squeezed my hand. Then you won't be alone, she replied. That mattered more than anything. For the next week, small things started happening. My mail arrived opened. Once, not by mistake. A bill I didn't recognize appeared in my name. Canceled before it posted, but deliberate. Someone drove by the house at night, slowly, not stopping, just enough to remind me. Fear tried to creep back in, but fear doesn't thrive where things are documented. I wrote everything down. Times, dates, patterns. Every incident went into a folder. The investigator called it insurance. I called it proof. Then came the phone call that changed the temperature of everything. From my daughter. Her voice wasn't soft this time. It wasn't pretending. "You think you've won," she said. "I think I've protected myself," I replied. "You humiliated us," she snapped. "No," I said calmly. "You exposed yourselves." Silence crackled between us. "You don't understand what you've done," she said finally. "You've destroyed this family." I closed my eyes. "The family was destroyed," I said, "when you decided love was optional." She hung up. 2 days later, the investigator showed me something new. Bank records. Not withdrawals this time. Transfers. Accounts I didn't know existed. "They've been moving money," he said. "Not from you." I frowned. "From where?" "From your husband," he answered quietly. The room felt suddenly too small. "What do you mean?" I asked. "He had a secondary account," the investigator continued. "One he didn't tell you about." That hurt. But only briefly. "Not for himself," he added, "for contingencies." Of course. Ernest never hid things for comfort, only for protection. "He moved money after the accident," the investigator said. "Small amounts. Carefully." My heart started to race. "How?" I asked. "He wasn't as incapacitated as they wanted you to believe." The words landed slowly. "You're saying—" "I'm saying your husband was conscious longer than reported," he said. "Long enough to act." That night, I cried. Not from pain, from recognition. Ernest had been fighting even then. The investigator leaned forward. "There's more," he said. He slid a document across the table, a transfer receipt, dated 2 days before the funeral. A trust, in my name, set to activate only if guardianship was attempted. My hands shook. "He knew," I whispered. "He suspected," the investigator corrected, "and he planned." The next escalation came fast, a cease and desist letter, accusing me of harassment, of defamation, of instability. They were throwing words now, big ones, empty ones. My lawyer, a woman my age with sharp eyes, smiled when she read it. "This means they're scared," she said. That same afternoon, my son showed up again. No folder this time, no paperwork, just anger. "You think Dad would want this?" he demanded. I didn't raise my voice. "Don't speak for him," I said. "Don't you did enough of that." He stepped closer. "You're alone," he said again. I smiled. "Not in the ways that matter." His hand clenched. For a moment, I thought he might do something he couldn't undo, but he stopped. Fear again. He left, without another word. That night, the investigator called. "They're being audited," he said. "Financial irregularities, not yours." I exhaled slowly. "How bad?" I asked. "Bad enough," he replied. The mask hadn't just slipped, it had cracked. The final confrontation came in a place I didn't expect, the grocery store. I was choosing apples when my daughter appeared beside me. "You look well," she said, bitterly. "I am," I replied. She laughed. "Enjoy it while it lasts." I picked up an apple, examined it carefully. "You know," I said, "your father used to say, rotten things look fine until you press them." Her face drained of color. She walked away without another word. 2 days later, the investigator confirmed it. Charges were being considered, not dramatic ones, financial misconduct, coercion, fraud, slow crimes,
The kind that don't scream, the kind that end everything quietly. I sat alone that evening looking at the trust documents, at Ernest's signature, steady, familiar. "I see you," I whispered. The house felt warm for the first time in weeks, not because things were over, but because the direction had changed. I wasn't defending anymore, I was standing, and whatever came next, they would face it without my silence protecting them. Justice didn't arrive the way I once imagined it would. There were no handcuffs on the front lawn, no shouting, no neighbors pressed against their windows. It came quietly, in envelopes, in phone calls spoken carefully, in meetings where people chose their words the way surgeons choose instruments. By then, I had learned something important. Loud endings are for stories that want applause. Real endings settle in slowly. The first official letter arrived on a Tuesday. I recognized the seal before I opened it. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. Inside were words that confirmed what I already knew. Investigations underway, assets frozen, actions under review. Nothing final, but enough. Enough to shift power. Enough to stop the forward momentum that had once terrified me. That night I sat alone at the kitchen table and made tea. Chamomile. The kind Ernest used to drink when sleep wouldn't come. I set one cup down, then, without thinking, set another across from it. I didn't move it this time. Grief doesn't disappear, it learns how to sit with you. The investigator stopped calling after that, not because his work was done, but because mine was. "You won't need me much longer," he said during our last conversation. "You know how to protect yourself now." He was right. The house felt different in the weeks that followed, not lighter, clearer. I rearranged things slowly, not because I wanted change, but because I wanted truth in every corner. I moved Ernest's coat from the hook by the door and folded it carefully into a box. I kept the scent. I let go of the weight. My children didn't come by anymore. They sent messages at first, angry ones, confused ones, then calculated ones. Eventually, none at all. Silence can be abandonment, but it can also be release. I chose to treat it as the second. One afternoon, while watering the plants near the window, I noticed something small and unexpected. Peace. Not happiness, not relief, just peace. The kind that arrives when nothing is chasing you anymore. I went to the cemetery alone the following Sunday. No flowers, just myself. I stood where I had stood before, on the day everything cracked open. The ground looked the same, but I wasn't. "I listened," I said softly. "I paid attention." The wind moved through the trees, gentle and unremarkable. That felt right. The legal process continued without me needing to be present. Lawyers handle conflict better when emotion is removed. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. Knowing that truth had found its way into the room was enough. What surprised me most wasn't what I lost. It was what I didn't miss. I didn't miss explaining myself. I didn't miss shrinking to make others comfortable. I didn't miss pretending love was something that could survive control. I missed Ernest, in quiet ways, in the pause before sleep, in the way morning light still touched his side of the bed. But missing someone who loved you doesn't hollow you out, it strengthens you. Months passed. Then one day a letter arrived, in handwriting I recognized. My daughter. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. It was a question. "Do you ever think we could start over?" I read it twice, then I folded it. I didn't answer. Some beginnings require forgetting, and I was done forgetting. The final confirmation came on an ordinary afternoon. A phone call. Short, professional. The investigation had concluded, findings documented, actions taken. I thanked the voice on the other end and hung up.
I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I sat quietly and let it settle. That evening, I cooked again. This time, I ate. I washed the dishes slowly. I turned off the lights one by one. Before bed, I stood in the hallway and listened. The house was quiet. Not alert, not tense, just quiet. The kind of quiet that means nothing is about to break. I lay down and slept without dreaming. That was how I knew it was over. Weeks later, someone asked me if I was angry. I thought about it carefully. No, I said. I was hurt. Anger burns itself out. Hurt teaches you how to stand differently. I still live here. I still wake early. I still talk to Ernest sometimes. Not out loud, not formally, just in the spaces where memory lives. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears the face of family. Sometimes it speaks softly. Sometimes it waits for grief to make you pliable. But so does strength. Strength waits too. And when it arrives, it doesn't shout. It simply refuses to disappear. I didn't leave the house much after that. Not because I was afraid, but because I no longer needed to escape it. For years, this place had been something I endured. Now it felt like something I occupied on purpose. I opened windows I'd kept closed, let air move where it hadn't in a long time. There were days I spoke to no one at all, and for the first time in my life, that didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like permission. One morning, while sorting through an old drawer in Ernest's study, I found a receipt folded into a book, a small thing, yellowed at the edges. Coffee, 2 cups, dated months before his death. I stood there for a long time, holding it. He had known, or at least he had suspected, and instead of panicking, instead of confronting, he had done what he always did. He had prepared quietly. That realization didn't break me, it steadied me. I began to understand that courage doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like leaving breadcrumbs for the person you love, just in case they need them. I donated the clothes my children had bought me over the years, the expensive ones I never wore. I kept the old sweaters Ernest liked, the ones that smelled faintly of oil and soap. Memory doesn't live in price tags. It lives in texture. A few weeks later, Doris came over with a pie. She didn't say anything when she set it down. She didn't ask questions. She just stayed. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the houses. "You okay?" she asked eventually. I nodded. "I think I am," I said. She smiled. "That's good," she replied. "You look settled." Settled. I liked that word. Not healed, not happy, just settled. The town adjusted faster than I expected. People are like that. They whisper for a while, then they move on to the next thing. Some nodded at me with respect, others avoided my eyes. Both reactions were fine. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. One afternoon, I passed my son's old car parked outside a lawyer's office. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. Closure doesn't always require a conversation. Sometimes it just requires walking past. At night, I slept with the windows open. I stopped checking my phone before bed. If something needed me, it would find me in the morning. And nothing did. That told me everything. On the anniversary of Ernest's death, I didn't go to the cemetery. Instead, I went to the river where he used to fish. I sat on the bank and let the water move past me. "I kept my word," I said quietly. Not to him, to myself. Later that day, I burned the last of the papers I didn't need. Old drafts, copies, printouts. I kept the essentials. Truth doesn't need clutter. As the seasons shifted, something unexpected happened. I began to make plans. Small ones. A trip to see the ocean. A class at the community center. a garden where the shed used to be. Life didn't rush back in, it asked politely, and I let it. Once, while standing in the grocery aisle, a woman approached me. "I heard what happened," she said carefully. I waited. "My mother went through something similar," she continued. "She didn't survive it." I met her eyes. "I'm sorry," I said. She hesitated. "How did you know?" she asked. "When to stop trusting?" I thought about it. "You don't stop trusting," I said. "You start listening." She nodded, like something had unlocked. When I returned home that evening, I realized something important. I wasn't living in reaction anymore. Nothing was chasing me. Nothing was waiting around the corner. The story had finished telling itself. All that remained was living. Sometimes, late at night, I still imagine the vibration of a phone in my pocket. A reflex, a ghost of urgency. But when I check, there's nothing there. And that's how I know the danger is gone. Because silence has changed its meaning. It no longer feels like a warning. It feels like rest. If there's one thing I would tell anyone listening to this story, it's this. Pay attention to the quiet. It's where truth waits. It's where strength gathers. It's where you decide whether you will disappear or endure. I didn't choose endurance because I was strong. I chose it because I was done being erased. And that was enough.
Thank you for watching. Your trust, your time, and your support truly mean everything. If this video brought you value, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel reach those who need it most. Stay focused, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next video.